Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online video with me, Sherman. Today we are taking a look at the Green Dragon Knight. This is a Dragon Knight build. It is made for main tanking in certain dungeons, not all of them, most of them. Some of the DLC ones you might have a little bit of trouble with, besides Imperial City ones. The dungeons there are pretty easy to do with this build. The Ruins of Mazatoon, Shadows of the Hist, Shadows of the Hist dungeons are, one is easy to do with this build. The second one, the Ruins of Mazatoon, is actually pretty difficult unless you know the content of that dungeon really well. It can be pretty rough. The other, the next in the dungeon packs, which I'm going to go ahead and go in here and just go through the DLCs real quick so you guys know what I'm talking about. The Imperial City dungeons, like I said, are easy to do with this. You can even attempt doing the trial in Orsinium. It wouldn't be too bad, but it could be something that you could work your way through. The two here, Ruins of Mazatoon and Cradle of Shadows. Cradle of Shadows is actually pretty easy with this build, but Shadows of the Hist would be a little difficult. Clockwork City Trial is doable as an off-tank with this build, but not as the main tank. The Thieves Guild content, the Trial, the Maw of Lorgage, is doable with this build as an off-tank, not a main tank. And same with the Craglorn Trials. Most of the Craglorn Trials you can do as an off-tank. Maybe a couple as the Hellrot Citadel you could probably do as a main tank, but it would be difficult. But you can definitely off-tank those. And then moving on to the Horns of the Reach, before we get into Morrowind. Horns of the Reach is doable on both dungeons with this build, but again, make sure you know the dungeons before you attempt them. Moving on to Dragon Bones. Dragon Bones is another one where the build works really good in one of the dungeons, but not the second one. So in the Thorvican one, the one with the dragon, is doable. The other one is not so doable with this build, but it is still viable in normal mode. Most of the dungeons you can do in normal mode with this build, cakewalk. Some you can even solo. Moving on to the Morrowind stuff. Morrowind is viable. The trial is viable with this build, 100%, to either main tank or off tank. So just letting you know. And in the new Somerset trial, it's better as an off tank than it is a main tank. But you can do it on both normal and veteran with this. It will be a little difficult to do it on veteran as a main tank, but you can off tank or main tank in normal, and you can off tank in veteran or hard mode. But make sure you know the build first before you try playing it. Like, learn the build, learn how it works, and then take it through like some dungeons, some earlier trials like the Craglorn trials, like Hellrot Citadel, and I forget the other name of the other trials in this area. But the one up here, this one is viable with this as a main or an off tank. This one down here is an off tank only because of one of the mobs, the axes, you cannot do with a main tank as a main or as an off tank with this. You have to main tank that final boss and then let the off tank with the sword and shield take on the axes. So, alright, so let's go ahead and get into this. And this is the build. It is an Imperial Dragon Knight. That's what I chose for the race. And actually Imperial for this is better for this particular setup because it gives you the max health you need. It gives you the max stamina you definitely need for this build to be viable and to be worthwhile. As you can see, we have an 893 magic recovery. You need a high magic recovery with these builds, mainly because when you two-handed tank, you use a lot of damage shields. And if you're not using stamina shields, you're going to be using magicka, especially depending on the classes of Templar or, in this case, Dragon Knight. You're going to be using magicka shields, and the magicka shields are going to be better for you because they work better for you. So the class shields themselves. Now, this is a shield stacking tank, so you have to play off shield stacking, and that's why this build works so well. The next thing you're going to notice is that the weapon damage is high and the weapon critical is high. That is perfect for this build. It is necessary almost. So we went with a high weapon damage and a high weapon critical. Like I said, you're more of an off tank for trials than you are a main tank. You can main tank most of the dungeons, not all of them, because of, unless you know them really well or you're a really skilled player, then you can main tank all of them. As you can see, we have a 2300 spell resistance with a 23,000 spell with a 19,000 physical, almost 20,000 on physical, and we actually go to a pretty decent amount when we get buffed up. Down here, you're going to see we are using the Lady Mundus. We do need those extra resistances for this build to work. We do get Major Savagery from the Expert Hunter, and we do use Tri-Stat Food. This is essential to this build. So moving on to the gear and the food and stuff, we'll go over the food real quick. So we are using the, if I can find it, here we are, longfin pasty and melon sauce food. This gives you the best in max health, magic, and stamina. You are going to want to use Tri-Stat pots. The live ones are better than the Crown Store ones. I technically don't have access to those because I'd have to make them, and I don't want to make anything like that right now because I just don't have the space for the materials. Alright. So, Tri-Stat pots, a definitive thing you need for this build. Alrighty, so, besides that, let's go ahead and get into the gear. As you guys can see, we are using one of the monster sets from one of the new dungeons in Dragon Bones, and that is the Thorvikin set. If you do not have Thorvikin, you can use Bloodspawn with this as a temporary hold me over until you can get that, but you will want this for this particular setup because of how it works. This will allow you to apply minor maim and minor defile on your enemies. It does do a little bit of disease damage, but it's the fact that anytime you damage nearby enemies, you summon a growing pool of this bile, and it lasts for 8 seconds. It has a cooldown of 8 seconds. So, like, as soon as it ends, it can be reapplied. So it's a constant uptime of this. And this is awesome for that minor maim uptime to keep that damage reduced, incoming damage reduced on your allies and yourself. The next thing we have here is we are using the Gladiator Set. A lot of people don't like the Gladiator Set because of the 1800 weapon damage when the enemy's below 25% health. But on the DK, this is phenomenal. It works out the best. Now, you guys are probably wondering why I'm not using Night Mother's Gaze to get that major fracture. DKs come equipped with it, and we'll get to that when we get to the skills. So we are using Gladiators, and the next set we're using is Plague Doctors because we need that immense amount of health for this build to be viable with its own damage shield. Its own damage shield is based off of max health, so you want to have higher health to make that shield strength a lot stronger on you. So having that 36k health really plays on this build really well. So we do have this set up with 3 infused pieces. As you can see here with Tri-Stats in them, this is going to give you a well-rounded mix of stats which you need to make this build work. The next thing you're going to see is that we are using a heavy shoulder and a medium helm here. And the reason why we're doing that is because this gives us the best in resistances than any other setup. The next thing we have is we are using a light belt in crafted, and we have it Nirnhoned along with the gauntlets are Nirnhoned. The reason why you want these Nirnhoned is this will give you the highest amount of resistances. You have to understand, when you're playing a tank that uses a lot of damage shields, you need a lot of resistances or damage reduction to help mitigate a lot of the incoming damage, because most of you're not blocking attacks. You're using shields to absorb the attacks, and then you're using the resistances to soak up some of that damage. Then you're using your damage reduction to reduce it even more. You do take a lot of damage with these builds to a degree, but if you have a good enough healer, you won't even notice it. Alright, moving on. What the heck? Sorry about that. Moving on, we are using Nirnhoned on the smaller pieces here, the belt and gauntlets, and on the shoulder and the boots we're using reinforced. The rest is infused. Moving on to the jewelry, we are using 2 weapon damage on Plague Doctor jewelry and healthy enchants. You could go Tri-Stats on these, but honestly, healthy works better with this setup. The next thing we have is an infused necklace with a magic recovery. We don't need a massive magic recovery. We need about 1,000 recovery when we have our potions going. So you can see here we go to 1,050. We need about that 1,000 recovery to make this build really, really viable. with Magicka Return. So that's the main reason why we have that magic recovery here. If you have a way of managing your resources a lot better with magic recovery, like say you're using a lot of synergies or using potions off a cooldown a lot more effectively, then you don't really need this. But honestly, I like to have that 1000 recovery because it just helps. Next up, you're going to see that we do have low stamina recovery, but don't worry, you're going to be doing a lot of heavy attacking to get that resource return. Moving on to the weapons, we are using a two-handed sword with a Crusher enchant infused. This is going to give us a 2108 resistance debuff on both spell and magic, or physical and spell resistance by 2108. This helps with DPS output, and then on top of that, we're going to be using Crusher also on the back bar. So no matter what bar we're on, we're always getting that Crusher effect. So that is the gear, the weapons, all that stuff, and I will explain why we are using a bow here in a second with this build, but it just works out in the end really, really well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the skills, and before I get any further into the skills, like going over the skill bar, you want to do this, by the way, make sure you get all your class passives because you do use abilities, especially with this particular build for all of them, and also make sure you get Iron Skin, because if you do block an attack, you do get an extra 10%, so you actually technically get a 20% damage reduction when you block, or damage mitigation when you block. So make sure you have this one filled out. Going over, like I said, make sure you get all your class passes. On the weapons, get your two-handed passives and your bow. And if you want, if you're not comfortable with two-handed tanking, always make sure you fill in all of sword and board so you have that available to you if you're uncomfortable tanking with a two-handed. Moving on to the armor. Light armor, you want to get the top 3 passives. Medium armor, you want the top 2 and the bottom 1. Heavy armor, you're going to want to get all of them so you have all the benefits of heavy armor. Moving on to the world skills, soul magic, you're going to want the top 2. And then on to the guild, Fighters Guild, get them all. Fill in all of those. You don't really need the top 1 or the bottom 2, but they help. But mainly you want Slayer and Banish the Wicked for this build because you will be killing things, so getting that 9 ultimate really helps. Moving on over here to Mages Guild, Persuasive Will, also a benefit. And then on the guild Sigic order, make sure you get all the passives because you want Deliberation and you want Concentrated Barrier, but it's also nice to have this Spell Orb for when you're out soloing in the open world. And Clairvoyance helps because you are using a stamina ability, and getting that reduced cost helps. On to Undaunted, we want the Undaunted passives. Alliance War, you don't need any of the passives. Moving on to Imperial, make sure you get all your Imperial things. You can be other races with this build, but Imperial just works the best with this setup because you get that 12% max health, you get the 10% max stamina, and then this one, whenever you deal a melee attack, you have a 10% chance of returning 6% of your max health back to you, and 6% of 36,000 is 2,000 something health. So you have a 10% chance of healing yourself for 2,000 health. Next up, going over to the crafting, medicinal use under alchemy, and then under provisioning, you're going to want to get Gourmand and Connoisseur. Alright, now going over the skills on the bar, and it's very important that you follow this skill setup because it's the best setup for this. So starting out on the main bar, we are using Crushing Weapon. This is going to give you a nice ability to do some extra damage if you have the ability to do that and you can get the resources back. Then it's a nice ability to use. Otherwise, this is here for the Sigic order, only passives. And that is Concentration, or Concentrated Barrier. So you can get that damage shield, that extra 5,800 damage shield, and Deliberation. This allows you to get 30% damage reduction while you're channeling an ability. And what you're going to do is you're just going to swap all these over one, and you're going to drop Deep Thoughts right here where Igneous Shield is. And that way you can use Deep Thoughts and you can get Deliberation work. That way you can drop this. And Deep Thoughts is a good ability, a good trade-off ability for Crushing Weapon. But technically you don't need it. The next ability on our bar is Brawler. This is here for the damage, but it is also here because you, for each target that you hit, that you critical hit, you will get Crusher applied to. It doesn't apply to just one target. It'll apply to all of them. So if you can hit multiple targets with your two-handed, you can apply that Crusher to them. So the more critical you get, the more chance you get of getting that Crusher applied to them. And on top of that, you will be using another ability that's going to give you Major Fraction. We'll get to that in a sec. So this gives you a bleed, decent damage, but again, this is mainly for the bottom section. You also gain a damage shield that absorbs 2,255 damage for 8 seconds. Each enemy hit increases the damage shield strength by 100%. So if you hit 5 targets, that's over a 10,000 point damage shield. So it's a really nice ability to use to get the mitigation, especially in trash fights. Alright, moving on to the next one. The next ability we have on our bar is Noxious Ref. This is our main Major Fracture applying ability, but this allows you to apply Major Fracture to multiple targets. Just like we're using the Brawler to apply Crusher, this also applies Major Fracture. So not only do you do 5,280, you do an extra 2,100 and something, 108 on top of that. So you actually do a lot more when you use Noxious Breath with Brawler. And if you keep them consistently applied, you can keep Crusher and the Major Fracture from Noxious Breath. Noxious Breath also does damage up front and damage over time. So it's a nice dot to help you with a consistent damage output. You won't be breaking big numbers most of the time. Maybe on single target, you're going to be doing like 5 to 10,000 if you're lucky. So somewhere in there. And then when you're fighting like that's mostly when you're fighting a boss or something in a dungeon. So you can get some decent numbers out of it. The next thing we have on our bar here is Igneous Shield. We have this because this absorbs 4,230 damage, but your own damage shield absorbs an additional 200% additional damage, and that's based off of your max health. So this shield is based off of your max health. It also applies Major Mending to you, increasing your healing done by 25%. Now, you're looking at this going, well, I don't have any heals. You do have one heal. You have Green Dragon's Blood, and it's on the back bar. So if you pop this, flip to the back bar, and pop Green Dragon's Blood, you can heal yourself for a lot. Next up, we have Wolfhunter. We have this here for crit, because you want to do crit to get that Crusher to apply to multiple targets. Well, you don't really need a crit to get Crusher to apply, but if you do get a crit, you do get more damage. You get my point? So it helps. If you don't want to use this, you don't have to. I like using it because I like having that higher crit, because I like to clear dungeons fast. The next ability we have on our bar is Flawless Dawnbreaker. Flawless Dawnbreaker is, in some cases, really one of the better ones you can use, but you can also use the standard, and I would suggest if you're going to use this, use the Standard of Might. So this one will increase your damage and reduce your damage taken by 12%. This is one you can use in exchange for this, but Dawnbreaker only costs 125, so it works out really well in dungeons to clear trash, because it helps you apply another dot to your enemies. It also increases your weapon damage by 5%, which applies to your Brawler, which increases the damage shield on this. Moving on to the back bar, and that's the other reason why we do have Dawnbreaker and Wolfhunter here, is because if you look into the guild skills, Fighters Guild, we have Slayer, which for each weapon Fighters Guild ability we have, we get 3% weapon damage, so we get a 6% weapon damage increase on the front bar with this 5% on top of that. That's an 11% increase in weapon damage. That's really good when it comes to this in doing some decent damage. Alright, moving on to the back bar. On the back bar, we do have Inner Beast. This is a stamina taunt. This is from the Undaunted skill line. You will not be able to get this until you've leveled your Undaunted, so it's better to go sword and board for a while until you get this unlocked, and then go with two-handed. So, but it's a great taunt, and it's also a nice synergy. When it activates, it has a 25% chance to create the synergy, and the synergy is really nice. Next up, we have Endless Hail. This is here basically for damage over time, but also to keep a Crusher applied. So while this is taking damage, this will keep Crusher applied. The next thing we have here is Green Dragon's Blood. This is a great heal. It heals you for 36% of your missing health, but it also grants you Major Fortitude and Major Endurance and Minor Vitality, increasing health recovery, stamina recovery, and healing received by 8%. So this helps you not only with getting resources back, but it also gives you a really good heal. Our next ability is our buff for our resistances, and you're going to keep this up pretty much non-stop. and that is Hardened Armor, and it's a really good one because it also, on top of that, gives you a damage shield, and this damage shield is equal to 17% of your max health. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like when I pop it off. It gives me a 6k damage shield for 3 seconds. So it's a really good thing to have on the back bar when I'm like, switch to the back bar. I want to get that off as quick as possible so I have a damage shield so I can activate my other abilities. Moving on, we are using Evil Hunter again. This is for the critical, mainly. So you still want that high weapon critical on the back bar. But if you don't, you could swap this out for something like Resolving Vigor. So you have a tick heal that you can apply to yourself and your allies after you pop your Dragon Blood. Last but not least, we do have Aggressive Warhorn here. This gives you max health, max stamina, and minor toughness, increasing giving you max magic, stamina, and health by 10% for 30 seconds. It also grants you and your allies major force, increasing critical damage by 15% for 9.5 seconds. Almost 10 seconds of increased critical damage, which is really good. That's why we have that higher crit chance, too. So now that we've seen the skills, we've seen the gear, we've seen all that, we're going to go and take a look at the CP. And CP is pretty much set up like a lot of my other builds I've released this update for Wolfhunter. 66 in Ironclad, this reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. Moving on over here, we have 56 in a Hardy. This reduces damage taken from physical poison disease damage by 12%. Elemental X or Defender, Flame Frost Shock and magic damage reduction by 12%. And then 23 into Thick Skin, reducing our damage taken from damage over time effects by 10%. So, somebody asked me why I don't put more into this, and I put more into the other ones, is because it doesn't matter, because any way you reduce damage, the more damage reduction you have, the better off you are. So this might only do 10%, but when you add it with these, that's another 10%. So that's a 20% reduction. If you do something like this, where it's 20%, and then 10%, that's a 30% reduction. Well, actually 34. But you can't really do that unless you take away from something else, and you can't really afford to take away from anything else right now. So moving on, we have 40 in the Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. This is perfect. That's like the perfect amount to have for mitigating damage with the shield. Next up, we have 19 in a Quick Recovery, increasing our healing received by 5%. This stacks with the 8% we get for the heavy armor, the 12% we get for being a Dragon Knight, or from one of our Dragon Knight passes, for activating either Green Dragon's Blood or Hardened Armor. So we will get a 12% healing received on top of that, and then on top of that we get another 8% from the heavy armor, like I said, and then 5% from here, and 4% from the Plague Doctor. So we get a lot of healing received, which makes it us easier to heal and keep alive. Moving on, we have 56 in a Warlord. This reduces break free cost by 20%. This is necessary for any tank to have a high break free reduced cost. 20% on stamina reduced cost is great. And when you have a high stamina, you don't even notice it very much. Moving on, we have 13 in a Sprinter. This gives us an 8% reduced cost in sprinting. We have 23 in a Bashing Focus. This reduces our bashing cost by 14%. We do bash to get enemies to be knocked off balance, or to allow them not to cast abilities or something like that, or to interrupt them. Moving on over here, we have 43 in Arcanist. This increases our magic recovery. We need a high magic recovery, or a decent magic recovery, so this 10% is going to be beneficial to us. Moving on, we have 43 in the Tenacity. This gives us stamina return on our fully charged heavy attacks. This is how we get our stamina back. Moving on to the last green tree. We have 56 in the Shadow Ward, reducing our block cost by 20%. It's always good to be able to reduce your block cost, even as a non-shield tank, or a sword and shield tank. You can still get that extra block. Moving on to Tumbling. We have 26 points, giving us an 11% reduced cost. Saves us resources. Moving on to the blue tree, we have 43 in the Bless. This increases our healing done by 10%, so it increases the effect of our Green Dragon's Blood by enough to keep us alive. Moving on to the middle tree, we have 40 in the Master at Arms, and that is mainly for Reposit only and Retaliation. When you block a heavy attack, your next light attack within 7 seconds deals 30% additional damage. Moving on over here, we have 43 in the Mighty. This increases our physical, poison, disease damage by 10%. We have 56 in the Thaumaturge, increasing our damage over time with our damage done with damage over time effects, like our Noxious Breath, our Endless Hail, and our Brawler all get boosted by this. Next up, we have 66 into Precise Strikes. This increases our critical healing and critical damage done. This is mainly here for the critical healing. The damage is a benefit. So, and then we have 12 into Piercing. This just gives us extra penetration to our stamina side, our physical pen, so we can actually deal more damage. When you're in the Overland, you'll have almost enough, you'll be high enough in penetration that you can almost remove all their physical resistances, because most enemies in the open world only have a 9k resistance. Now that I've shown you guys the CP, I'm going to go ahead and take this over into the trial that I like to test in. Even though a lot of people say it's not really testing, but it is. It's going to show you guys how well this build can mitigate damage and stay alive at the same time. I am doing this on normal mode, not veteran mode, because in normal mode it's a lot easier for me to show you the trash and then show you the minor boss encounter with this. So you can see for yourselves that this thing has really good survivability. And before anyone asks, yes, two-handed tanking has been a thing that's been in the game for a long time, but nobody's really done it because nobody's seen a point to doing it because of the lack of capability that it had before. Now it has a really good capability to be a viable option with the new updates that have come into the game and the amount of CP we have available to us. So first thing you're going to want to do is get this up, drop your Endless Hail, and if you look, I can stand here pretty much all day and I don't have to worry about anything because I can mitigate all this damage because of that pool around me. It's just mitigating a lot of their incoming damage. I can just sit here and light attack or heavy attack all day long if I wanted to. Since I've taken a little bit of damage, I'm going to go ahead and do this and then pop my green dragon's blood, and as you guys can see, it heals for a decent amount. We're going to go ahead and Dawnbreaker these guys, bring them down a little bit, and as you can see, this doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I'm only doing about 17k, but I'm also hitting all the targets in front of me and around me with a lot of different damage over time abilities. But if you can keep up Noxious Breath, pretty much, and just dishing out the rest of it, you can pretty much stay alive non-stop with this build, and nothing's going to kill you. And with the taunt, you can taunt pretty well. Oops, missed that one. And sometimes you might have to do things like that, but if you just heavy attack, watch this. Just a couple heavy attacks and you go up pretty fast. You get 3k back from each heavy attack and resources. So and if you do feel like you need to chain the enemies and bring them in closer or whatever, you can do that, but most of the time that should be the main tank's job. The off tank should be focusing on helping the group just do DPS. So as you saw there, the survivability of this thing is pretty incredible. It's pretty viable. But now this is where things get tricky because you can't always use your Igneous Shield here or this or Green Dragon's Blood because they are magic abilities. So you kind of want to watch out where you're applying things, especially from the mage. The mage will definitely do some stuff to you because she can cancel out your magic. So you want to make sure you stay out of her circle as much as possible. I'm just going to go ahead and die. But there you guys go. You can see that it has decent survivability. It actually does have really good survivability. You just have to know how to play the build or understand the build. A lot of people don't understand how two-handed tanks work, and the main reason why is because they don't take the time to learn. They focus on whatever is easiest. And this isn't an easy playstyle. It has to be something you have to grow comfortable with. Once you grow comfortable with it, it becomes pretty much just like sword and shield tanking. Cakewalk. But that's it for the Green Dragon Knight, guys. I hope you guys like it. If you guys do, you guys can hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me or other videos by me, you can hit that subscribe button too. Also, other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.